Hola, ¿qué tal? I'm going to speak about my challenge year. My challenge year was last year. So the years are 2024 to 2025 of last school year. I will be discussing my challenge year into two different parts and into two different meetings. So today, as part one, I will be covering four items. The first one is defining my challenge year. The second is I will explain how the data was collected and organized, and I will also define some key terminology of the exam used and also the key terminology that most language teachers use. Third, I will describe the teaching methods that I used under this challenge year and the strategies. And lastly, I will review the progress made by all my seventh graders based on the pre and post test results of the AAPPL exam. So, what was my challenge year? So, what I did last year as a challenge year, I measured my students' progress in Spanish by testing them at the beginning of the year, right after we got back from Catalina, and then they took the ERBs, and then I tested them in October. And then I tested them again that same year in May. I used the Apple exam, which shows that it shows what students can do with the language and whether they are at a novice level or at an intermediate level. I used type A. There are two types for the Apple exam, type A and type B. I use type A. Type A has an 8-level scale. It goes from novice levels to 1 to 4. So novice 1, novice 2, novice 3, novice 4. And the same for intermediate, intermediate 1, and then 2, 3, and 4. Second, so how the data was collected and organized. So I took all the scores from the Apple from the website from the man that was helping me administer the Apple exam. I took all those results, and my mentor John graphed on graph paper by hand. He graphed all the pre-test scores from October, and those are shown in black. Everyone has a copy. And also in May, we took those scores from May and then graphed those. And those scores, those post scores, are shown in orange. One thing to keep in mind is that the number of students tested at the start is not the same towards the end because some of them were absent. One of them, it was just two. One of them was absent and the other one had technical issues, two or three, I forget. Just keep that in mind. Some terminology to define. So type A, I talked about, it goes all the way to I4, intermediate level. So the highest score they could get is I4. So that's the type of test we took. And type B, that is a higher level test. If a student shows advanced levels, that is the appropriate test. Now, because I use type A, I'm only defining novice and intermediate. There's also advanced and then superior, distinguished. But for the purpose of my test, novice, what does it mean to be at a novice level? And what does it mean to be at an intermediate level? So novice level, when a student is at a novice level, they're using only words, phrases, isolated words, memorized phrases, actually. And sometimes they're able to use simple sentences. Por ejemplo, yo soy una chica. Very, very simple sentences. At an intermediate level, that's where it gets really interesting because it's no longer memorized phrases. They start creating language at these levels. They could handle simple social interactions. They could use sentences. They could use connectors. I am feeling sad because da da da. And they could participate with a native speaker um, in familiar, predictable topics. Like they could talk about family, they might go to a restaurant and be able to order, go to the store and be able to ask for what they need. and so on. So intermediate is a little more interesting, but yes, it takes a number of years to achieve. So these are the four skills again: interpersonal listening and speaking. That's having conversations and responding to questions. On the Apple test, they ask them questions and they have like 2 or 3 seconds to answer. If they can't answer, they move on to the next one. And that's the hardest skill to achieve because you have to listen, think, and respond quickly. You don't have any time to monitor whether you have the right conjugation form or not. That's not communication. So it's very hard to do all those skills at the same time. Listening, that's just listening to the language. Reading is a byproduct of listening, and writing is also a big byproduct of listening. So listening is very, very important. The words have to go in your head. You have to understand them in order to read and write. And the hardest one is the first one. So let's look at, we will be looking at these skills later on. And now I'm going to talk about the teaching methods and strategies that I used in that year and that I'm still using and improving as I go, as the years go by. So, a lot of the strategies and methods and philosophy, when I enter the classroom, what I think about is Krashen's ideas. And during COVID times, I read Krashen's amazing book, a book that I recommend, and I recommend all administrators to read because it really helps you understand what it means to learn a language and makes a difference between learning and acquiring the language. So what it means to acquire a language. Okay. In that book, it's Principles and Practice in a Second Language Acquisition. This is a test, okay? This is not the real speech. So please, I'm making mistakes. So in Krashen's book, he explains that language is acquired when learners understand messages rather than memorizing rules. A big component to his idea, and a lot of people try to debunk Krashen, but it's been impossible. So one big idea is comprehensible input. What does that mean? What does a CI classroom mean? When you have a CI classroom, you're making Spanish very clear. You're making it very interesting through stories that the students can relate to visuals that the students can relate to. And of course, there's a lot of interaction happening in the classroom. The students have to engage with this teacher 90% of the time so they could acquire the language because they're acquiring the language through real communication, not just screens. Having the kids on a computer, it's not acquiring the language. Right now, I'm talking to a computer and I'm an avatar. And I'm not presenting if I were to have a real human being in front of me, right? So the next component that you should keep in mind as a CI teacher is CI plus, which means that you're stretching students just beyond what they already know. And you don't want to go too far. You want to keep a balance because you don't want to overwhelm them. So keeping the class challenging, but not overwhelming, or else they give up. And I've seen that where you have to memorize this, you have to learn this, and no, 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 no. The kids get discouraged. Another strategy that I use and I'm not very good at, and I wish, and I'm trying, and I'm taking classes is TPRS. Some people think it's silly, but it's the hardest recipe of my teaching career. You have to be a comedian, you have to be clever, you have to know what students love, their music. You have to juggle a lot of things, perspective. But basically, his idea is having fun with the language, and that is done through stories. Blaine plays with perspective a lot. So you tell a story, you create a story with a funny, hilarious story with the students. And some students, and then when you retell it One student has to say it in the yo form, another student has to say it in the to form, and another person in the narrator form. And there has to be a lot of repetition for in order to have healthy language. That repetition enhances, produces healthy language. So repetition is key. So here's a little slide of a story that I have done with the students. So here, Mia has a problem. So you create the story and you start creating like you start playing with perspective and start co-creating like how many problems do I have, and the students have to guess. Oh, many, 100, two, three, and then you come up with something really unexpected. No, guys, I have negative 500. Yeah, negative 500. And they remember the funny negative 500. Why would she have negative 500 problems? But she has 2 million problems. And below that, she has little mini problems. So you start making the story fun, and then you could use the past tense, tenía, and so on. The affective filter is really important. This is something hard sometimes for me because do get tired as teachers, but this is key. This is key for every class and subject. You have to have a very relaxed environment where students feel safe to take risk. Um, you have to keep the stress low and the engagement high. It has to be fun and not stress in order for students to make progress. The format of the classroom, the best format that I've had in all these years, 25 years of teaching, is the deskless classroom because it supported all these strategies. You're creating stories, you're communicating 90% with the students. It's very comfortable to have a setting where you're all sitting in a circle. You're sitting in desks and on chairs, not desks. No one could put their head down. No one could hide behind the computer. Computers and desk are gone on the side, and it's just your body. As soon as you sit, you know you have to speak Spanish. You know your prof is going to be funny. You know you just have to do it, and you have to like switch your mind. You're going to sit there and speak Spanish, and you have nothing, nowhere to lean on a desk. Now I am going to do video 2, and I'm going to review the progress made by all my 7th graders based on the pre-test results and the post. So again, the black is the pre-test, all the black graphs. And the orange is the post test, and we're going to compare and we're going to see how the graphs shifted to the right or to the left or right, left, right, up, down. And I will highlight the progress that students made for each skill across all the different skills. Again, these are the skills. Interpersonal listening and speaking, the hardest one. Interpretive listening, let's just call it listening. Interpretive reading, let's just call it reading. Presentational writing, let's just call it writing. Again, reading is a byproduct of listening. Once you have all those 3, you could do interpersonal listening and speaking. You go back and forth. So this is part 1 of my awesome presentation. Now, are you ready for part 2? Goodbye. I'm trying to shut it off.